Good afternoon. Welcome to AFFIRM's August Lunch Program. I'm Melissa Bruce, Government Vice President of Programs, and we extend our warmest welcome and appreciation to you for joining us today. Today's program, How COVID-19 Shattered the Myths on Government Management, will be showcasing several very distinguished government leaders. First, we have Soraya Acquisition, Chief Procurement Officer from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Next, we have Beth Ann Killoran, Deputy Chief Information Officer, General Services Administration. We also have Mark Crisco, Principal Deputy Acquisition Data and Analytics Acquisition Enablers, Office of Undersecretary Acquisition and Sustainment, U.S. Department of Defense, and our moderator, Jason Miller, Executive Editor, Federal News Network. I'd like to take a moment to share some insights about AFFIRM, the Association for Federal Information Resources Management. We are a nonprofit, volunteer, educational organization with the goal of improving the management of information through technology within the federal government spanning over 40 years. In the spirit of AFFIRM's charter, we have raised and contributed well over $250,000 to date for high school and college scholarships. We would like to thank our volunteers for their hard work to put programs together and continue to support the IT community even during these times. We extend our sincere thanks to our generous speaker series sponsors, SAIC, TrustWave, Fed Insider, ServiceNow, and Excel Technologies, as well as our sustaining partners shown in the slides. Their logos are included in acknowledgement of our appreciation for their support. AFFIRM will continue to hold an array of virtual programs, so please check AFFIRM's website for upcoming events. Now over to Bill Pratt, my program's co-chair, for a few quick housekeeping items.
Thank you, Melissa. So folks, if you have a question, simply open the QA tab on your webinar toolbar and type in your question. If you see another question you'd like the speakers to answer first, click the thumbs up button and that'll upvote the question and we'll get that in front of them sooner. If you're having technical difficulties, use the chat box in your toolbar to chat with the webinar host. It will take care of you. At the end of the webinar, there's going to be an opportunity for attendees to interact with the panelists and ask questions live. If you have a question that cannot be answered in the Q&A tab, you can raise your hand for the host moderator to unmute your line. We've also included a very brief survey at the end to capture feedback on the event and to help us continually improve. We appreciate it at the end of the program if you can take a couple minutes to participate with that. Thank you. Melissa, back to you.
Thank you, Bill. Without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's moderator, Jason Miller. Jason is a longtime active participant in the AFFIRM events. Please join me in giving Jason a very warm AFFIRM welcome.
Thanks, Melissa, and thanks to Jacqueline Rubino and Bill Pratt and all the folks at AFFIRM for inviting me to moderate this panel. It's always a joy to help out with AFFIRM. And as you heard, I'm Jason Miller, Executive Editor of Federal News Network, 1500 AM, just to remind you all that your AM radio still works. And of course, you can always find us online, federalnewsnetwork.com. Now, our topic today is telework, or I like to call it now remote work. It's funny how things change as we have to do more of it. And usually, if you've seen me moderate panels before, you know I like to start with a little trivia. That's a little more difficult when we're in this virtual setting. So I'm going to move over to some statistics to maybe get your brains moving. So bear with me for a few minutes and then we'll get to the panel. In 2018, about 22% of all federal workforce teleworked at some point during that year. Now that's the latest data from the Office of Personnel Management. The 2019 numbers aren't quite ready yet. But of that 22% who teleworked, only 42% of the entire federal workforce was actually eligible to telework in 2018. Now, just compare that to where we are today. And Federal News Network did a survey in June, and we had about 1,800 respondents, and 92% of them said they were teleworking. So just compare our sample, and one could maybe surmise that the number of teleworkers has almost tripled across many agencies. Now, let me start there because I want to talk about how we got there a little bit and some statistics that I've kind of gleaned from CIOs over the last few months as I've talked to them. At the Veterans Affairs Department, the CIO told me recently they tripled the number of their remote access employees from about 40,000 on a typical day to more than 140,000 today. And their telehealth sessions for veterans average roughly about 2,000 a day pre-COVID, now more than 30,000 a day. At the Transportation Department, the CIO told me that in a matter of 5 days, they went from about 40% telework enabled to 100% telework enabled. That's about 3,000 to 4,000 folks a day to about more than 10,000 folks a day. And finally, I just heard from the Drug Enforcement Administration. Pre-COVID, their network could support 1,200 concurrent users on their VDI, virtual desktop interface platform, about 900 on their VPN platform. That's out of about 15,000 employees. They upgraded their network, and now DEA can support 10,000 users on their VPN and about 2,500 on their VDI solution. So as you can see, agencies ramped up, they upgraded. Now the question, this is where the panelists are going to come in, how do you keep it going? How do you make sure your network is still enabled? How do you make sure their employees are still happy and successful? And obviously the mission critical work, the most important thing. Now each panelist is going to take us about 5 minutes, maybe a little less, to update you on how their agency is faring and how they're going to move forward with telework and what we're often saying this new normal. They're going to tell you something you don't know. They're not going to talk about their biographies. They're not going to tell you what DHS does, but really how to create a better discussion for among all of us about what this future looks like when it comes to telework and management. So, and I want to make this panel obviously interactive as possible. It's boring to sit through a bunch of people just talking at you for 25 or 30 minutes. So submit your questions early and often, and we'll get to them as soon as possible. So that being said, let's turn to the panelists. We drew straws, and Mark Crisco from DOD, you won the short straw contest. So take it away. Let us know about DOD and teleworking in the new world of management.
You're on mute, Mark.
You're on mute.
Mute. Unmute, Mark.
All right, there we go.
It's always one of us.
Well, I thought somebody else was going to do it for it. I guess this is the whole argument of having a new world order. We're learning new tricks every day on how to do this. And what I said was thank you, Jason, for doing this, and thank you, AFFIRM, for talking about a topic. I really want to talk about two things. It's one, the way we work, and two, the work we do. I know, Jason, you had said you didn't want to hear about the mission, but I think we've been moving to an environment like this for a long time because many of us represent large organizations that are worldwide, certainly national. And the question of our mission and the mission that I have to fulfill is how do we move data across the seams? How do we move it organizationally? And in my case, it's acquisition data, working with the services, working with the CFO, working with the CIO. And I have to worry about the functional area of acquisition data for the major defense programs, in fact, all of the programs, of how we need to manage that. And I don't think we started in this spring. We started a few years ago of thinking about how and what organizational models do we have to put in place to leverage authoritative data across the department, no matter where you are. And that gets the technical standards, it gets the functional standards, it gets the strong data management standards. And I think we've been moving around that path for a while now. And it is just proven out that to meet the mission, that's what we were going to have to do. Now, separately from that, we also have to work differently because, you know, when many of us, we were in various stages of work at home or work from a remote site, we had a sense of that as well, too, because we had a very federated workforce, both of vendors as well as government. So using a variety of tools and techniques. And when we were sent home as leaders of those organizations, we, too, had to adapt for that. But I would say our organization, we were already doing some of that because we were in locations around the city already, you know, whether it be in the Pentagon, the Mark Center. So we were either on a bus, but now we were on a phone. So we could take out inefficiencies of running to meetings, running from Mark Center to Pentagon to Suffolk Building. And we just needed to learn how to work virtually using VPNs as well as the infrastructure that the CIO provides us. And frankly, a lot of those things were in place for us. Maybe not at the scale we needed as a whole department, but they quickly moved to that environment. So, you know, when I think about it, to kind of put the point on it, you know, the real thing is, did the mission suffer at all? Absolutely not. In fact, I think we gained some degree of efficiency. But we also had to learn how to work a little bit differently, working with our staffs, working with our vendor bases on that. So I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Jason.
I really want to maybe dig a little deeper into this idea. Did the mission suffer at all? Not really. Maybe you gained some efficiencies. Maybe what's the one area you'd point to, or maybe two, that where you saw some efficiencies? Because a lot of people say, well, you know, Mark, I got to see you every day. That way I know you're doing what I need you to do, or I know I can talk to you because when I have a problem, I can find you. But if you're working from home, I don't know what you're doing. That's the old kind of thinking.
Well, yeah, I think it is very dated thinking. You know, I'm fortunate to work with some very distinguished colleagues, and you know, yeah, I'm sitting in my basement most days for longer than I would be working. The efficiency of me personally of gaining a commute. The downside of that is, you know, you lose some degree of connection with your people. So we find ourselves, we do daily stand-ups so we could touch base for, you know, 5 or 10 minutes, say, hey, what do we got going on? And internally within my organization, I said, we just have to communicate more and better, more effectively. In the old days, we would walk around from office to office. Well, that doesn't really work in this type of environment. So today we get on the phone, we use email. The efficiencies that we gain, we're not running around walking for a cup of coffee. A cup of coffee is easy. It is all the small little things that add up to we're getting more productivity. And, you know, I'm not worried about where my teams and where my vendors are. We are very specific on what the deliverables are. So we know what we should be doing. And the question is, we measure at the outside. And it's not, you know, time clock punching and touching up those pieces. My bosses find me, you know, within 10 minutes is probably the longest time. And that's maybe when I get my 10-minute lunch. Over.
That's great, because I think people forget that how much time does get, and I'll use this in quotes, wasted during the day just by getting up and walking to get that cup of coffee, or walking around and, hey, did you see that show on TV or the game last night or whatever it is. So let's compare that to, and let me bring in Beth Kaloran. Beth, GSA has been known for teleworking. You guys were among the first ones to jump out in front of that bus, so to speak, and really take a hold of it. So walk me through how things have changed for GSA and how you guys have adjusted.
Yeah, so thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Jason, for the question. Yeah, we were probably on the opposite end of DoD or DHS. Just based on the kind of work that we do, our organization is more attuned to having telework, where we would have 40 to 50% of our employees teleworking on any given day, even before the pandemic, and of which about 20% of our employees are permanent teleworkers. So that helped us in many ways to already be in an avenue to shift to 100% or as close to 100% as we could get of telework. Obviously, there's some work, no matter what organization you're in, that cannot be done through telework, but at least our infrastructure was in place to handle that. We did, though, have to make a few tweaks. It was very interesting to see that across our regions, across the United States, the telework situation was great. The one area where we had to make some VPN and VDI changes was actually for the DC area. That was the area that had the least amount of telework and the most amount of executives. So as we shifted to the telework, that was the one area where the bandwidth got very saturated very quickly. And within the first couple of weeks, we made some tweaks and everything has been golden since then. But one of the things that I think that for us, there have been 3 areas, even within that we had some changing and some alternating of the organization that'll probably be permanent in some way, shape, or form. The first was debunking the myth that you can't be as collaborative if you're virtual, right? You've got to have a whiteboard in the room. You've got to have people around to do thought-provoking conversations. In our organization, you know, we have a number of collaboration tools, but a huge uptick in email usage, but the usage of our virtual tools for meetings and other collaboration forums went up exponentially, right? And so, and not only just, for 1, 2 people meetings, 5, 10 people meetings, we actually did whole conferences where we had to cancel the conference. So we're talking a couple thousand people now shifting to a virtual environment. And the fact that we actually were able to successfully execute on that demonstrated to us that no, you don't always have to be in person to be successful. You can have the right tools in place. And even our executive leadership is like, you know, they actually see their counterparts, their peers, their direct reports more now in a virtual world than they ever did when we were all in the same building, because everybody's running back and forth to meetings. And so they've actually found it to be more collaborative and be able to be more engaged with their peers and with their employees in a virtual world than they were actually able to do when we were all sitting together. And from that, we've already been asked to incorporate some new digital tools. So some people still want their whiteboards, for example. So we're actually now adding some tools so you can do visual Post-it notes and be able to do whiteboarding through this forum versus having to try to have somebody in the background try to write things and see if everybody can squint at it. So we're taking the technology that we have and augmenting it with new capabilities. That's one new thing that we've done. And I think Mark kind of alluded to this, is when we were more coming into the office, there were more set and fixed office hours. Now those kind of have gone out the window for a number of different reasons. One, because we're in the house and we see hearing pings and beeps, and we respond as the pings and beeps go off. The second aspect of that, you know, there's new norm. People are helping, you know, their elderly parents. They're, you know, doing things with their kids. They're going out and walking their dogs. And so with that, their office has changed, and the hours by which that they are working we're changing the work schedule and the office hours to better accommodate the change in their home environments. And so with that, GSA a number of years ago had made the change of only having kind of on-site support or help desk hours for the most part during kind of core business hours. Well, that doesn't work when, you know, people are logging in at 5 in the morning and they're still logging in at 10 and 11 o'clock at night. So we actually launched a virtual digital assistant for help desk support. So no matter when you're now asking for support, our digital Curry is there to help you, right? So our little Madam Curry can help you from whatever aspect that you need. So one is, you know, the first one was, you know, who's where, somewhat changed. The second one is where and what hours they're working. And the third being that the tools that they need. The next set of that for us is also looking at the demographic as we return to the office, because we've always been working, but as we return to the office, what are going to be the final demographics of our workforce in the future? And so now that we have our EIS contract, we've already started engaging our vendor with, you know, how do we better provide network as a service? Because there are going to be some areas where that network connectivity to that last building is probably going to shift permanently. And so how do we make sure we're looking at our investment and making those changes to our network more dynamic, and as opposed to just having a permanent road through the network saying, we're always going to keep this up, it's always going to be this size, but realize that the occupancy of those buildings has dramatically reduced, and we've still got this huge network capability there, but where we're shifting is mobile, right? How do we do things virtually and from a mobile perspective? And so that is kind of our next shift that we're looking at, is how do we make sure that we're continuing to increase the mobile capability or the virtual capability as we balance that with the returning to the office of what we're going to need in the future.
All right, excellent. I have one quick follow-up, but I'm going to remind the attendees, please go ahead and submit your questions. We'll get to them as soon as you submit them in. So let's keep it going. So Beth, there's a lot to dig out there. The first thing is, let me ask you about the virtual digital assistant. I always got to ask, is this some kind of intelligent automation? How does it work?
Yeah, so we actually are using our ServiceNow implementation, and they actually have, it's more than just, you know, kind of a bot. It actually is artificial intelligence. We actually have programmed it with some key self-service capabilities, such as how you reset your password. You know, I'm having a problem getting into these applications. We trained it on how to answer the predominance of our top service requests, and it is learning as it goes. So you now can go on live and talk to our virtual assistant It will try to either help you with your problem or get you to an article that'll walk you through solving the problem. And if it doesn't know, it's learning how to figure out those answers as it goes, and we're continually populating it with new use cases. So that we think will be a big piece of ours. And then the other thing for our return to the office that we're trying to do is we're trying to limit low touch. So when people are trying to return equipment, we've actually started piloting what I'm calling IT vending machines, which is you'll be able to, you know, deliver a broken device through the machine or through a locker that you don't have to hand to somebody. And you can actually push another code and get a brand new one from another piece, so that you don't have to have downtime, but you also don't have to have that physical connection with the folks. You can just drop it off and go. And then eventually you can get a call to the locker or to the vending machine, get your original device back.
All right, there's more I could ask you about, but we're going to move to Soraya. Acquisition, this is an interesting report I saw recently from INSA, the Intelligence National Security Alliance, and they said the IC community really struggled to move online with acquisition. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, you guys probably didn't struggle as much. Talk about how the pandemic has impacted acquisition at DHS.
Okay, well, thank you, Jason, and thank you for the opportunity to join my distinguished colleagues and talk a little bit about the new environment. So first of all, so I do have a classified component that actually works with the intelligence community. And interestingly enough, the biggest change for them was really rotating their schedules, enabling them to work the flexible hours so that they could come into the classified facilities and access their classified networks from the office, and making sure that they had, you know, the safeguards available in place. We've been quite successful in that. We have a great schedule for them to rotate. They connect with one another. But here's the thing. 100% of what we do is not classified. There are portions of the work that can be done in an unclassified environment. There are elements of work that they can do. And we figured those out so that our folks could telework when it was feasible and then go into the office when they needed to. So our classified environment is working well with that, and we continue to work with the intelligence community as we get smarter and more efficient about how we do our business. But looking at the unclassified environment, certainly for us, it wasn't a radical change. We already were embracing telework in a lot of our offices, and it does vary by component and the mission sets that they have. But I'm going to focus a little bit on headquarters, because in DC is usually where you have your largest concentration of employees. We were able to pivot very quickly to telework. At my office, believe it or not, we were 100% telework ready, because we're not strangers to emergencies and situations that sometimes pull us out of the office right away. In fact, we had an incident at headquarters in December where we had to send our people on 100% telework for 3 days. And based on that, I made sure that our folks were 100% telework ready, meaning they had the equipment, the resources to be able to telework. In addition to that, in pushing efficiency and embracing automation in the acquisition or the procurement environment, one of the things that we had implemented was our electronic contract filing system, so that we could do things in a virtual environment, so that we could process documents in a virtual environment, and even create our contract files in a virtual environment. And so we kicked off that project last fall. And actually, most of our offices are on, in fact, all of our offices now, all of our components are using the system and finding it quite efficient and helpful for them to do their work. And then the other thing that we did was looked at our policies and our procedures where we needed to automate, the elimination of wet signatures, seals, and those kinds of things, notarizations, et cetera, for certain notifications. So working with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, we immediately issued deviations to the FAR so the folks could submit documents electronically that normally would be done through hard copy paper or wet signatures, et cetera. But the other thing that I want to mention, in the acquisition environment, one of the things that I've always felt is extremely important is communication. How we communicate with one another to get information out and to get information in. And so one of the things that we did was we quickly pivoted to adopt all of our practices, whether it was industry days, consensus evaluations, oral presentations, whatever the case may be, to convert to a virtual environment. And we did that quite successfully. In fact, even before our folks went on 100% telework, we started in what we called virtual industry days quite successfully. In fact, one of the first ones was our data center operations contract, where we did that one. We were in the office, but we actually held a virtual event for industry. We've continued that. I think in this environment, the most important thing that has to happen when it comes from a leadership standpoint, what has to happen is you have to engage in far more communications. You have to be more thoughtful about how you're going to communicate, what you're going to communicate, and how often you're going to communicate. And so one of the things that we did was we stood up a variety of forums as soon as we went into 100% telework mode, a variety of forums to not only bring our community together, the procurement community within DHS together, and have conversations on an ongoing and recurring basis about various things, whether it was CARES Act implementation, how we were adapting our environment, whatever the situation. But we also increased communications with our stakeholders, our counterparts, our colleagues. So it wasn't uncommon, and it isn't uncommon, for us to have a lot of meetings where we were bringing in our other lines of business or our customers or even our counterparts in other agencies to engage in more communications. And then, of course, we set up recurring conversations with industry associations. We started out on a weekly basis, we switched to biweekly, and now we're on a monthly basis, having a regular dialogue on a Thursday morning at 9 o'clock for 45 minutes with industry associations to answer any questions that they have, impart any new information that they need to know on any changes on our processes or our approaches to doing things. And I think all of these are extremely important. And the last thing that I want to add is I chose to lead the way I lead in the office. So all of the events that I had hosted in the office, every meeting, every celebration, every conversation, I adapted it to virtual. So it is not uncommon for me to do a drive-by with an employee either through Teams or on the phone or what have you, as I would in the office, to kind of visit them. And I try to be very visible to them on these platforms. I get on every single day, no matter how much I don't want to be seen. I get on it every single day and try to engage in conversation with the folks and let them see me and know that their leader is here for them. My deputy does the same thing. And as a result, people really appreciate that. But we've had our excellence awards, because I want to talk about the fun stuff. Excellence awards, we held our employee appreciation days. Today we did a years in service celebration. That I think is extremely important to keep that normality, if you will. But being flexible, being adaptable, and leading by example. I'm here in virtual world with them. So they don't feel guilty seeing me sitting in the office. They know that I'm here with them and I'm going through the same adapting that they are and adjusting to the world that we're living in. Over to you, Jason.
All right, so I saw a couple questions starting to come in, so that's good news. But before we go to those, Soraya, let me just ask you one quick follow-up. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the electronic contract filing system. You said it started last fall to implement, now all offices are using it. Is this at the headquarters level? Is this through the components? And give me a sense, walk me through, like, if I'm going to use it, how does it make my life easier as a contracting officer?
Sure. So first of all, it's applicable to all the components. This is a DHS-wide effort for the procurement community. And our goal here was to create an environment where people could file their contracts electronically. So they would have a repository of their contracts electronically available to them within their component. But it gives us the ability that if they need to transfer that contract to another component or organization, they can do so. Also, it enables us to be a little bit more efficient, a little bit more effective when we're looking for information, or if we have to respond to, say, like a FOIA request, et cetera. So we started in the fall with a pilot project. I'm happy to say all the components are participating, some more than others, because there's still some transition issues there, right? You have to digitize files, et cetera. But the big thing that we're doing, it also allows workflow. So it allows us to process documents within the system for review. And it literally enables us to create an electronic file. So think of that file folder that contracting officers usually have on their desk. Same concept. We're creating that file folder in a virtual environment. We trained all of our contracting professionals. This system was a commercially available system that was adapted to our environment, and we brought in our users. We brought in contracting officers and contract specialists to help us configure that system, design it, and create the rules around the operation of it, along with our privacy officer and our records management folks.
All right, sounds like something you may be asked to share among others across government. Let's get to one of our one of the questions that has come in. This is an anonymous attendee, so who knows who that is. But they ask, in addition to the use of small, mid-sized team-based collaboration tools, how have your respective organizations been handling the need for larger scale video communications and collaboration? For example, support for all hand sessions or larger group communications. Mark, you're the largest organization in government. Maybe start there.
Oh, I wish I knew the answer to that one. I think we've been doing a lot of small and large. I don't know the large because most of the conferences have been sponsored actually external to us or personally for me, it's been in the mechanisms, and we've learned a variety of tools associated with that. When we've done our large, and they would not be considered large in an all hands, but when I've gone, let's say nationwide, everyone from SOCOM to the services, we've been using DCS as well as phones to adopt for that. We've hit some ceilings in some cases where we've had over 100 and 100 may be the limit to the capacity. So we've kind of coupled the two to make the meetings go. I wouldn't say it's been perfect because when we're in DCS, the collaboration tool from DISA, you can see everybody who's there, but others call in. You don't have a laundry list of that, and taking a head count is difficult. And even knowing when to start, in our case, management meetings associated with all the, you kind of wait till 3 minutes after to make sure everybody's in and on, so you don't deal with that. I've not had the experience of really big. I could see where that would be very helpful for us, and something that we would, go to the CIO or go to the joint service provider and say their requirements for us. But we're largely beholden to the IT organizations to help us there. Over.
Beth or Soraya's shaking her head. You want to jump in?
Sure. So we had planned earlier this year, we had planned in the spring to have our CPO symposium, which would include probably over about 1,000 people. And we quickly converted it to virtual. So a couple of things that I would say. First of all, you got to work hand in hand with your CIO to make sure you have the right platform, the right tools, and you're set up correctly. But you also have to think about how you conduct your sessions. And so one of the things that we did was created the opportunity to really segment the symposium so that there were sessions identified for a specified period of time. You would have breaks in between the sessions because it is a lot harder sitting in this virtual environment for 8 hours straight. It's really difficult. And then the other thing that you have to do is you kind of have to practice your sessions. So you're going to have a panel, you want to practice so that you're not talking over each other and you know how to throw questions to each other, kind of like what you're doing right now, Jason. You're doing so well. So those are the kinds of things. And you have to think a little bit more about what you're communicating, how you're communicating, and what visual aids you're going to use, because they can get pretty boring pretty quickly when people are sitting, kind of in front of a screen all day. But we've converted our training, our PIL workshops, which we call our boot camps, which are highly interactive. We've pared it down to a 4-hour session instead of a full day session, but maintain that interactive nature. So it's about using the right platform, and it means you got to team with your CIO, work with them to make sure you have the right platform, but you also got to think about the structure, the content of the presentation, and how you sequence the events, how many speakers you have, and how those speakers work together. Over.
I want to ask Beth the same question before I do that. One thing I've noticed is things like the AFFIRM lunch that we're here today. There's no lunch part, so all of a sudden we're done in an hour. And I think a lot of people are realizing, hey, maybe these all-day conferences have not been as necessary. Beth, jump in on your platform use. You guys had a big TTS industry day as well, and that had tons of people on it, including me.
Yeah. So we've done two things. So we are a Google shop, and one of the things that we have implemented here is Google Live. So we actually had a administrator really wants to make sure that she's doing town halls. So she's done them regionally and as an all hands for everybody. We could get over 10,000 people. And we actually did check when we did the all hands. We actually got to a little over 10,000 people using the Google Live feature. It combines live streaming with this. So the speakers actually have the ability to interact with each other and then all the participants get to watch the presentation live and be able to submit questions. So that has worked really well. And then we have identified a couple of additional platforms to that in the events of having these large educational forums. GSA really prides ourselves in being able to share and collaborate across the federal government and be able to hold training sessions and different types of things. And so we had one type of software, and we're actually moving to a couple of different platforms that we're trying that might have some additional ways to be interactive and not just have the panelists, but be able to have people popping in and out with questions and things where everybody can be very interactive. So those are in the pilot form, and we'll probably pick one of the two or maybe keep both of them in the next few months. In addition to that, as I mentioned, we're also piloting something called Google's Jamboard, which allows us to do what I said, which is do the whiteboarding and things to the collaboration on a large scale, on a small scale, and to have the interactions. But to Soraya's point, I mean, one thing that you do have to think about, you can be a little bit more on the spot and kind of go with the flow when you are having people in person, because you can kind of make some changes on the fly. When everything is virtual, you do have to think through things a little bit more. You need to do a little bit of a practice sessions because it is a little bit harder to recover live. And so you want to make sure that you understand what media you're going to use, how the presenters are going to interact with each other, and how that's all going to kind of come off before you actually do that. And so instead of just talking about the topics now, doing the test runs of the technology really helps to make sure you have a seamless engagement like we are today.
All right, I have a question for my colleague Mark Rockwell over at FCW, and he is this specifically for Soraya, but I'm going to expand this a little bit because I'm interested too. So maybe Beth, you could talk a little bit more. But has the shift to remote work changed how DHS will use or plans to use the EIS telecommunications contract? So start with Soraya on that one, but Beth, I want to hear more about also the network as a service piece. So Soraya.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Good question. I am not aware of any significant changes in our approach to how we're going to use the EIS contract, because we were already, in various stages of telework throughout the Department of Homeland Security. So I'm not sure that it's going to change radically how we're going to use the EIS contract, but it is going to make us rethink some other areas, how we adapt our employees to the telework environment, and whether we telework on a 100% basis going forward. I mean, right now we're going to stay in this mode, but we don't know that that's the 100% solution. Let us not forget that it wasn't but a few years ago we were creating the open work environment where everybody collaborates and coughs at each other and talks to them. I'm kidding, but remember, so I think we got to be a little bit more measured this time and make sure that we don't go to one extreme. So that would be my comment on that.
And I guess one follow-up just for Mark, because I know what he's thinking. I'll assume what he's thinking here. Any delay in the RFP or RFQ or fair opportunity solicitation, anything you can comment there? Because we all, I think a lot of people in the industry are saying, where's DHS? When are they going to release theirs?
So I don't know who wasn't looking, because DHS already did put out a solicitation that closed, and we are in the process of evaluating
Okay.
as well. So I'm not sure what they're looking at, but we have done at least one. DHS is in the process of putting out solicitations. Of course, COVID-19, I wouldn't say it slowed us down. It made us rethink some things, because we had to think about how we were going to engage with industry, how we were going to get the solicitations out, get the proposals in, evaluations, et cetera. But we are in the process. We do have one under evaluation and expect to make an award before the end of the fiscal year.
Well, as you know, all that's behind the firewall that we can't see as reporters, and that's a whole different discussion that I could have with you. But I'm going to ask Beth to jump in here a little bit. And Beth, one of the things you mentioned about EIS is the re-looking at or the addition looking at network as a service. Can you just talk maybe a little bit of your thinking behind that?
Sure. Yeah. So we actually had been, piloting software-defined networks even before the pandemic, and looking at how we can kind of do some virtual networking to make sure that we are being as effective as possible. As with my peers on the panel, there's a lot of federal sites out there, and every one of them has, you know, a circuit out to it. In many cases, there's multiple federal organizations, even in those same buildings, and we're all kind of paying for that. We have, you know, 5 people in the building or 50 people in the building. And, you know, we do it based on what we think the capacities of the building are, not necessarily what's actually happening with the folks in those buildings, right? Whether they're actually there or not. And we also know that there are certain times of year, such as right now, Soraya and Mark, where there tends to be a little bit more need for network capacity than potentially maybe, I don't know, Christmas or Thanksgiving, right? But we're paying for those same network circuits, the same amount of capacity at the spike, right, as we do in those low periods of time. And they're really, why do we do it that way? Just because it's the way we've always done it. But if we go to this software-defined network, we base it on the capacity we need. We make sure that we're looking at those virtual kinds of network capabilities that allow us to throttle, right? Think about your electric and your light, right? If the lights are off, nobody's in the building, then maybe you don't need to have the network on, right? Or if you're, you know, having that surge capacity, how do you make sure you're surging up very quickly to make sure that we're able to process all of our end of year processing this time of year? But then when we hit like November 1st, we can throttle back that network. So building that software defined network and being using this will allow us to be able to build the network that allows us to shrink and grow as our need does. Think about the cloud. I mean, it's the same reason that we went to the cloud, to be able to have that flexibility and to also put in to the people that have that core capability to manage infrastructure, let them manage it versus the government, that this isn't our core competency. Let's do the same thing with our telecommunications providers and let them, you know, tell them what our requirements are, make sure they understand that we want this to be commoditized and having them provide that to us as a service.
All right, there's so much more to ask you on that, but I will move us over to another question. And this is an interesting one, so maybe Mark, I'll bring you back into the discussion here. Brian Wilson writes, what processes or procedures can you highlight that have been improved, all caps, because we're now in a predominantly virtual work environment? Maybe Mark, lead us off on that one, and then we can go around the panel.
So I'm going to build a little bit off Beth for that, because we always think about it as eaches and the workers in that. But, you know, coming from a functional and a data perspective, we're a partner with that infrastructure piece. While we are not the ones deciding, the better we can, where we've really improved is understanding how we need to manage and move data. And we had done studies over the past years of not everything needs to be FOUO, not everything needs to be public, not everything needs to be that. And pulling on that Gordian knot has been difficult for the past few years, but critically important, because we are all moving. Technology and technique are just embedded into our business practices, and it's no longer paper anymore. And we're going to need networks, we're going to need applications. And the functional side, and in my case, acquisition, if we don't sort that out, you just can't throw it over the bow to Beth and say, go handle it. You know, when Dave DeVries was here, he was like, well, your title kind of looks like mine. What's the difference? I said, I do the part that you don't do. You know, help me with security. We'll help you with access and dissemination. And as a team, we can understand how to move it. And to answer your question more pointedly, we know how to do that better today than we did 2 years ago. And that will help both the technology side as well as our side of understanding how to do it. I think it's going to be a long way to go of institutionally getting people to get out of a paper mentality. You know, whether Soraya, whether you're talking about contracts are digits now too. Clauses are digits now. And we need to think about it as bit part pieces. And it's a labor of love for many of us, changing that mindset to a data-driven organizations. But I think we're well on the road to that. A lot of work remains, both organizationally as well as technically. But, you know, we have a new CDO in the Department of Defense, and we're already working together of how do we make that go. Over.
And Mark, just real quick, because I want to bring in obviously the others. When you talk about understanding how to move data, is that a sharing issue? Meaning, I know now that I need to share more broadly or more specifically with a certain office or a certain person, or are you talking about the actual data movement, like we have to put it in a data lake and then we need to reach in that data lake to do analytics, or a little bit of both?
Great question. It's both. It is really both, because what we do is, I like to think about it, it is not only the functional meaning and understanding of what you're moving, it is also technically, and our decision was to go to an open API infrastructure. Those things are embedded in those API definitions. So the technicians understand what and how we're moving it, as well as the organization needs to know how to move it and what it means at a level of abstraction that they can handle. If you don't do both, it's largely inefficient across the scene. But I think it's all important, and it's bowel work. It's nobody wants to do what we do, but everybody cares about what the results may be.
Soraya, you're also smiling, and jump in.
Oh no, because I totally agree with the way Mark described it. It is bowel work. I would answer that question a little bit. It's not that the business processes is improved, it's how we're conducting those business processes that I think has improved the most. In other words, I think the leaders have understood and figured out, and at least I can speak for my counterparts across DHS, that greater collaboration is necessary in this environment. In other words, that you do have to work a little bit closer together, that you have to make that concerted effort to bring in your CIO, your CHICO, your CFO, et cetera. We were on that track, but I think this heightened it, right? This made it extremely important to make sure you include them. So I think collaboration has improved significantly, which leads to better business practices. Coordination in what we're doing, how we're doing it, what we're doing, and even how we're engaging our employees, because we're trying to filter down to our employees to have that same level of collaboration and coordination that we're having at the senior levels. I would say communication, of course, has improved. I think we are engaging each other a little bit more. Now you're like a little bit more conscious that I gotta go ask the CFO, or I gotta go talk to that CIO, as opposed to, I'll just wait till I see them in the staff meeting and I'll just, do a drive-by, when I see them outside going to get lunch or whatever. Now you have to make a conscious effort and schedule that time or find that time to make it happen. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing because issues come to the surface a lot faster. And then the other thing is flexibility. As I've always said, I think the rigidity that we saw before, and I'm not going to say it's fixed overnight, but I think people are understanding that we have to continuously be flexible, that we have to be a little bit more understanding, a little bit more empathetic and compassionate with our counterparts, because not everybody is working under the same circumstances, right? Different people are adapting differently. So I think that's where I've seen the biggest improvement, is in those 4 areas: communication, coordination, flexibility, and of course, communication. And I would say that is yielding business process improvements, because anytime we can do those things better, whatever it is that we're doing, is going to go faster. And of course, I named a few of my favorite process improvements. We got rid of wet signatures, hard copy papers and seals and all that good stuff. I've been yelling about wet signatures for years. So I'm excited by what the prospects are, that what we can continue, what we can keep going forward.
All right, Beth, jump in as well.
Yep. So first of all, I appreciate my colleagues. It does take a village. This isn't I hand it off to the tech folks and they solve it and everything else is glorious. I think the biggest part of all of this is the technology has been there for a long period of time at this point. The problem has been the cultural desire to make the change. And I think that the forcing mechanism has now been this event has been the catalyst to not only forcing the change, but showing that the myths around, no, you're not going to be productive, everybody's going to be out on the golf course, or everybody's going to be, taking their kids to the zoo, has really proven to be incorrect. And that now we've actually seen, not only are we able to be productive, but probably even more productive, has been able to, I think, sway a lot of opinions. But with that there are some things that have been inherently built in to our processes, to the way that we operate, that require in person. So for example, in our organization, we do a lot of construction, right? And so they actually make building managers come in and look at the contractor's work to certify it before they can get paid on particular segments. We've talked about at this point, could we use, have them take photographs that are geotagged to show that they were in the building at the right spot and not make a person go in. So it is really rethinking of how some of those things that required in person to be there, what could you do differently and how could we operate differently? And for us, it's not only just for our employees and their employee safety, but it's really taking us to what that customer experience is for our federal counterparts and for the citizens at large. I mean, think about the things that people have been using in their daily lives for some period of time now, whether they're their smartphones or whether that is your personal assistants of your Suris and your Alexas, that people have had their smart homes, with their Ring doorbells. But those types of things really haven't been mainstream in government. And I think that we have found out at this point that yes, we can be able to achieve those things. We just got to make sure that we're thinking about the business process, the velocity by which your culture can make those shifts, how we look at privacy and security as part of those aspects, and what is the actual customer experience that we're looking for. So I think that overall is the long-term shift we're going to see here, which is how do we be better for our employees? How do we be better for our citizens? And looking to industry and others that have gone down this journey before us to be able to take this as our launching point for the new digital government for 2030, for example.
We got a question from Joseph Knobloch, and I'm not sure how you guys are going to be able to answer this, but we'll give it a try. He asked, how do you see the shrinking of the building footprints, and what will you do with those buildings? Is there a major initiative across government to see how much savings from not being in the physical location versus new technology for teleworking? So I guess he's asking, as we move forward, what's the office going to look like, and are we going to have less office space, and has that discussion started to happen yet? Maybe
I can say that, tell you that they've actually federal agencies have already started talking to the Public Building Service about this. And I can say that GSA ourselves have already started been thinking about it. Even before you shrink the footprint, one of the areas that we know that we've had cost savings, at least this year, is around utilities, right? I mean, the water bills are going to be lower, the electric bills are going to be lower. Actually, how do we get money for the buildings that GSA occupies potentially into innovative digital capabilities or other things that we're going to need. The Public Building Service has at least started thinking about and have been talking to customers based on what they're engaging on. What does that workplace of the future look like? Those are really just nascent kind of conversations, but they are at least starting to have those conversations. And I do know that some agencies are already starting to think about, hey, we probably will have an increase in telework. We really would like to at least start gauging GSA on what our future footprint is going to look like as we start shifting our particular agency in a different direction. They don't have any, specific goals yet in mind, but they are at least talking about that. And I do know, like I said, for our agency, we're at least looking at some of the savings that we made this year based on the pandemic and where we'd like to potentially invest those dollars, and then having the broader conversation with the customers, which our administrator, Emily Murphy, is having conversations with every one of the customers on their, not only how they're using the Public Building Service, but the Federal Acquisition Service, so that we can do better strategic planning now and in the future to meet those evolving customer needs.
I can only imagine Federal Acquisition Service is up, Public Building Service is down in terms of quote unquote the revenue that they bring in. But very, very interesting. Soraya, same thing?
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. I mean, I think, folks are going to have these conversations, but we also have to be realistic. I don't think it's 100% one thing all the time. And so we just have to be careful and plan properly, because there are some functions where you do need to bring people together. And we're in the middle of a pandemic. Let's hope the pandemic is not going to last forever. And then when we decide what normal looks like, what real life looks like and what is normal, where does it make sense to go 100% telework, 80%, 90%, what have you? Because there are people out here as we've been talking about, oh, this is wonderful, everybody's teleworking, blah, blah, blah. That's great. But there are people that don't like to telework. There are people that would prefer to separate their personal life from their work life. So they don't want to be at home working for many reasons, one of which is that they're just not comfortable in that environment. And we have to think about those folks too. So we have to strike the right balance. And so I think we have to be thoughtful about what we do, how we do it. And certainly I've always been an advocate of telework, and I will always be an advocate of telework. And I'm also an advocate of flexible work schedules. Not everybody needs to be in the office from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. every single day. Sometimes some of your best work can be done after hours. We're a large, country with different time zones. So that's my 2 cents worth. As let's just move forward realistically, looking at what we do and how we do it.
All right, Mark, you get the last word because we're going to wrap up after this.
I want to build on Soraya. I think, we talk about it in terms of work. I think flexibility also gives us access to talent, and talent that we couldn't have otherwise had. And as Soraya points out, you have different people and different purposes, and they think about, do they like to work at home? Do they not? I think one important thing we didn't talk about, and I'm grateful that Soraya had mentioned this, that she does this on the pop-in, we need to worry about our workforce's mental health as well, too, because this has been stressful on the workforce because it's different. And I think we as leaders, executives in our organizations, making sure that, it's nice when you have a drive-by going to the restroom in the Pentagon. We can ask people and talk to people. It's just not all work. We need to treat our workforce as human beings, make sure they're, Maslow's principles, their security and safety is taken care of, but we also need to take care of them as people and know that we value them. And I think it's important for us, beyond the technology, beyond the technique, beyond our management styles, that we are a human race and that we should care about each other as we move on. And with that, I'll stop.
All right, I will turn it back over to Melissa, yep, there's Melissa.
Yes.
Melissa, first of all, let me thank our panelists. They did a wonderful job as always. So if we could all virtually clap for them, of course. And thank you to AFFIRM. And Melissa, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Soraya, Beth, Mark, and Jason. This was a really great discussion on a timely topic. We appreciate you taking time to join us today. We know you're all incredibly busy. AFFIRM applauds your contributions and leadership through these unprecedented times. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We encourage you all to take time to complete the survey, and we hope to see you at next month's events. Thank you.